Hello, everyone. This is Melinda Schmitty Connect here for Work Together Wednesday with Adon Eamon. And I would like to ask you, if you are watching, to please say hello. Don't be a lurker. Put something in the comments so that I know that you're watching. If you're watching the replay, please put in hashtag replay so that I know that you were here. And if you have any questions, please put in the comments and Adon will be happy to address them for you. First of all, Adon, this is one of the good things to come out of COVID that I met you through online networking. We've never met in person, but I feel like we're good friends.
I do. Isn't that weird? I was so looking forward to the trip to the mountains that I didn't get to go to with you guys. I'm hoping we're going to do that again. But yes, this is like amazing. I feel like I have like several new friends that I've never met, but I feel really like I really know them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, and I love your company name, which is IRS Hostage Negotiators, because anybody that's in trouble with the IRS feels like they've been taken hostage and they get threatening letters, and you're the one that comes in and saves the day, right?
Yes, that is my passion. Yes, that is what we do. That name actually, we originally had a different name, and I was told by a marketer, really, you need something that people will remember who you are and what you do because I don't know how many of your listeners know this, but many of us find ourselves like Melinda, not in trouble with the IRS at this moment, and you do everything right, but you have no idea. It's a very high percentage of business owners that will someday, at least at a minimum, get a correspondence audit or something from the IRS. And you get that letter in the mail. I even got one, and it was just a notification that I get as being someone who works with the IRS, but it had just my name on it and didn't have a client name on it. And my heart was like, oh my gosh, I mean, I know what to do, but I also know I would never represent myself. That's something we probably won't have time to talk about today, but I would never represent myself. I do have other people that I would have represent me, but I saw it and immediately, oh my gosh, And so you want to know, kind of like we were talking about earlier, side note, someone you can trust,
Yes.
so that when and if that day comes that you get that notice, you already know who to call. You don't want to wait till that day to be having a nervous breakdown
Right.
trying to figure out who you're going to call. So,
Right.
yes.
And you are going to share with us today your top three tips for small business in particular. Um, I know that you have lots of tax tips. If you are not following Adon on social media, go follow her page, even if you're not in trouble with the IRS, because she puts out very helpful information so that you're prepared. So if that day does come, or if you know someone who says they're in trouble with the IRS, you've got some information and you know where to point them to. So I highly recommend following your channel, but I asked you today to share with us the top three things you would tell a small business owner. So the first one is about creating an entity, and I do have experience with this. The first company that we created, actually my first company was an LLC, and then the second company we decided to do an S corp, not realizing everything that was involved with that. My third company, we're back to an LLC. So talk about that. Why that makes a difference.
So, you do want to make sure that when you're first starting out and you're not making a lot of money, so you don't have the money to spend on an expensive CPA firm or expensive bookkeeper, or you're trying your very best to be wise, mind you. Don't do your bookkeeping. That's part of the third tip. But don't do bookkeeping if you honestly are not going to do it. But you need to understand that it costs more in terms of compliance. It takes more to do compliance for an S corp or a corp than it does for an LLC, and that is because you have additional. For instance, when you do your tax return, you now have two tax returns, not just one. When you have an LLC, it's considered a disregarded entity, so it's filed through a Schedule C, and that your tax preparer is not going to charge you nearly as much as they are for an S corp. An S corp return is harder. It takes a lot more time, and some tax preparers won't even do them because they're just not skilled enough to do them, right? And you definitely don't want to do it yourself. That's another thing. People end up in a lot of trouble because they just mess it up. And so I would say if you don't make, this is my own personal thought, and this is just my own calculations in the background on how much it costs for the bookkeeper, how much it's going to cost to, because now you have to pay yourself payroll, because you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary under an 1120S, all of those things. I would say if you're not making 250 grand, then you know, I would still be in an LLC. Once you pass that threshold, then you need to do the numbers. That's not like a hard and fast for sure number. You still need to do the numbers, right?
To
And you
see
need
if
to
it makes
understand, okay,
sense. Okay.
yeah, you still need to say, okay, talk to your CPA. Okay, how much more are you going to charge me? Talk to your bookkeeper. Hey, do you understand what all needs to happen? Can you do the payroll, or do I need to hire ADP, or do you know? And I would highly recommend, by the way, you're very careful about who is doing your payroll. And the other thing is the risk. That not only is it costing more, but the risk in an 1120S, which is an S corp or an 1120, once you add payroll, mind you, if you're an LLC and you have employees, maybe it's not as big of a jump for you, right? But if you're a sole proprietor and you're not paying yourself a payroll, you're not having to file forms 940 and 941. And once you start filing those, once you hire someone, or once you become 1120S and you're required to pay yourself a reasonable salary, it's the wording,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you have to file those basically forever. Even if all of a sudden you're like, okay, you can't do this, but say you decided you're not going to pay yourself anything, you still have to file them. I mean, maybe you don't have any revenue, and so you have a good argument, so you aren't going to pay yourself a couple of periods, right? You're not going to
Right.
pay it, and you're like, well, that makes sense. You still have to file the form. It's considered an information return, so you have to file it as a zero filing, or you will get a penalty for not filing it. So all of that goes together with the corporate, the 1120 or 1120S, which is a corporation or an S corp. From a tax perspective, and of course the bookkeeping that goes behind it is very important. And so an LLC is a great place to start. The most important thing really, between, even with those entities, is that you don't just file the paperwork and then not keep the books correctly. For instance, a lot of people end up in my world that have an 1120S. They've got a payroll problem now. Not only have they got a payroll problem, but they also they commingled funds. And so the commingling, I can unmingle for tax purposes. The IRS doesn't like it, and you're likely to get an accuracy penalty, which is significant. But more important is if you get sued, and I'm not an attorney, it's not legal
This is
advice.
not legal advice.
Not
Okay.
legal advice, but I know from talking to my attorneys and talking to other attorneys that I just talked to, once you do that, it's very easy for a decent attorney, someone that's suing you, to pierce the corporate veil, which is the whole point
Oh, right.
of having, even an LLC. It's not necessarily corporate, but that's the same thing. You're trying to protect yourself personally from something that
Right.
happens in business. And if you use the same bank account for your costs and the company's costs, or if you're paying costs for you personally out of there and you're not booking it as a distribution yourself, and really just don't do it, period. Pay yourself and then use your own money to pay your own stuff. Because when you commingle like that, it's really easy for them to pierce that. And now they're going to, they can take your house, or
Uh,
they can take your personal stuff. So
okay.
that's number
So
one.
you're
But
defeating the purpose of having an LLC.
yes, you are. And again, all of the compliance and keeping up with the S corp is burdensome, you know, mentally, physically, and financially.
That's what
So
we found. That we had to have quarterly meetings and we had to document and we had to submit.
that's another thing, right? Yes, all of that, all of that. And I mean, it's not a huge deal. Once you're making that enough money for it to make sense, then all these extra efforts and all these extra costs begin to make sense, because you're able to give yourself a reasonable salary and then distribute the rest so that you're taxed at a lower rate. That's the whole point, right?
Right.
Or if you have an 1120, you can keep money in the 1120. And 1120S, side note, The difference between 1120S and 1120, so Corp and S Corp, I mean, there's more than just as a difference, but basically from a tax standpoint, the reason to do an 1120 when people do it, and that's when you make even more money, is because you really aren't getting the money out. You're going to leave it over there like a stock investment. And so you don't want it to be taxed to you personally. And you're not going to get a double tax because it's getting taxed at corporate at a lower rate, especially right now. Depends on whether they change the corporate rate, right? But it's taxed at a lower rate, blah, 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 blah. And it's allowed to grow into this entity that is worth more to you and that you can, kind of hold as an asset. 1120S, everything's going to come to your tax return anyway on a K1. It's all going to flow to your 1040. So the only difference is that if you get audited, another side note, please don't ever file a return like, well, I probably won't get audited. And if you have a tax preparer currently who that is their tax planning for you is, well, it's probably gonna be fine. She probably won't get audited. You need another tax preparer.
Okay.
And I say that to you lovingly
And
because
that leads us to your point number two, which is hire a good CPA to help you strategize, pay
yeah,
quarterly taxes.
yes, you need a CPA or an EA. Those of you who don't know what an EA is, an enrolled agent is strictly tax. I mean, in many ways, certainly when I got my CPA license, I didn't know anywhere near as much as an enrolled agent does about taxes because a CPA takes multiple exams about multiple things. There's 4 exams. An EA takes an exam that is specifically about tax and dealing with the IRS and procedure with the IRS. So an EA is a great choice for a tax
I've
preparation.
never heard of that. So, do you pay more for an EA than a CPA, or
No, a CPA tends to cost more because a CPA you need a CPA when you get big enough, or you have something complex enough, or you're really trying to look at, for instance, okay, Melinda, we're going to meet quarterly. We're going to talk about what your financials look like. We're going to give you financial planning advice. We're going to help you really look at your P&L, your profit and loss statement, and understand what's happening and understand where your expenses, where we could be working on these things, where some of your ratios are off, as well as they can do your tax. They can also do tax strategy planning if that's what they do. I mean, some CPAs don't do that, right? There's some CPAs that just audit. So back in my former life, I was a controller, so that's kind of why I picked that because that's what, as a controller, that's a lot of what you do for big companies, right? Or at least it's what I did was looking at the results every month, every month, every month, trying to figure out where we're at and where we're going and what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right, and whatever.
mm-hmm.
That's a CPA has all of that, and typically when they have a firm, they also are a tax specialist because they spend a lot of time, like I have, learning about tax as well. So you have really a CPA typically. It's hard to say which costs more, an EA and a CPA. It depends on what they do. So, for instance, I'm a CPA, and an EA can do what I do, as can a tax attorney. Um, and I specifically focus on tax resolution, right? Well, when I get involved, this is another reason to hire a good CPA to begin with, is when I get involved, or when an EA or tax attorney who does what I do gets involved, we cost a lot more.
Mm.
And because we're fixing usually a disaster, right? Like we're cutting off the bleeding and we're going back and we're fixing and we're advocating for you and standing between you and the IRS and saying, hey, no, this guy's a great guy and here's why and whatever. So there's extra things going on there. But you asked how much, which one costs more. It very much depends on what they're doing for you. I mean, if you hire a CPA firm, you should definitely make sure that if they're going to do the bookkeeping for you, that they're billing that bookkeeping or they valued it at a bookkeeper rate.
Okay.
Sometimes, like for me, I have a couple of bookkeeping clients because they didn't want to go anywhere else. But I mean, I'm still hopeful someday I might find a book, but or I might even hire somebody someday to just deal with bookkeeping if I end up with more of them over the years. Um, but typically I don't. Typically I hand off that work to a bookkeeper or CPA that I work in concert with, and they take it over after I've got them fixed. But if those clients that I have, because they're trusting me and they're scared, and that's why they don't want to go anywhere else. I review, if I hire, I don't review, I do it for them now. But if I hire a bookkeeper, I would be reviewing everything that's happening. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so they would be still paying a little bit more than they would a good bookkeeper because you've got two people having to touch it now,
Right.
and one is a licensed CPA. So if you hire a CPA firm and they're going to do your bookkeeping for you, it's a great option. And I absolutely, I mean, I love throw out Paragon Tax and Accounting. I love their firm, and I love. There's a lot of firms that I love, but I love that they really do a good job with like taking the bookkeeping to the tax for your average Joe. I also have several others. I'm not going to throw everybody's name out, but anyway, they have a bookkeeper on staff, and they're going to charge you the rate of that bookkeeper for the work of the bookkeeping, but you're going to have like a little charge that's a little more each month because they're reviewing what that
Mm.
bookkeeper's doing. So, I feel confident when I give somebody to bookkeepers that I know and trust. I mean, it's not the same as if I were reviewing their work every month. I can't give you that level of assurance because I'm not
Right.
reviewing. But if anyone needs a bookkeeper, let me know because I refer people to bookkeepers that I really do trust, and I know that they have enough experience in whatever area. I kind of try to refer people to people who are specialists in their area, or I know they already have a couple clients, and I'm very sure that they know what they're doing. They're not going to be learning. You're not going to be their
Right.
person. You're not going to be their guinea pig, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, and again, trustworthy. I mean, you still don't want to give them the ability to write checks on your account or pay your payroll taxes especially. Um, those are critical. I mean, because you're held responsible and your tax return. I mean, in the end, the CPA or bookkeeper, whoever it is that you hand that off to, you have to understand that payroll and tax returns, you ultimately are responsible. And there is no such argument as, well, my CPA did that.
Right.
They will not care. And you will be the one who's left standing there. And maybe your CPA will stand, right behind you. But ultimately, it's not their problem.
Right.
And they can be brought up on before the OPR. So if you ever meet a really bad CPA, there's the Office of Professional Responsibility you can turn them over to, but that is not going to save your bacon.
Okay.
So
All
anyway,
right. That's good. And tip number 3.
be honest with yourself about your skill set. So I have to be honest with myself. Melinda, actually, you and I were kind of talking about this beforehand, and we talk it offline again later. Social media, building the website, all of that, not my skill set. Have to understand that I'm going to have to pay for. I mean, I've got to figure out how to pay somebody to do that for me, because in that case, nothing's coming through my door except for my referral. I mean, I have lots of referrals from CPAs and things like that, but from my website and my social media, nothing's going to come from there unless someone who knows what they're doing has built it and built it well. So what I'm saying for my CPA accounting world is, if you don't already know how to do bookkeeping, starting a business is hard enough. You are wearing so many hats. And most people, I mean, even I, see bookkeeping, I understand when I'm looking at someone's bookkeeping is a cost center, it is not a profit center.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't want to spend money on bookkeeping or CPAs because it's like, that's compliance. I got to do my taxes, but that's it. And I understand where you're coming from, but I also deal with people every day who are in a living nightmare because they have this great entrepreneurial spirit, which is also why I got into what I do, because I'm just really passionate about helping entrepreneurs. My dad is a farmer, my mom is a hairstylist. Like, my family is just full of people who are small, sole proprietor, kind of companies. And so I love that spirit. I think it's great. My little brother, he's always wanted to start something new. Anyway, I love that spirit. That spirit isn't necessarily the personality type that loves to file and bookkeep, and you will tell yourself that you're going to buy the QuickBooks Online and you're going to do it. And 6 months, 8 months, a year, some of my clients 8 years later, you have you've got a mess,
Yeah.
and now you can't prove your expenses, and so you're going to have to pay taxes on way more than you actually made. And not only that, but you're going to have to pay penalties and, all of these things. So you need to understand, not understand, you need to be honest with yourself about what your current skill set is, what kind of time you're about to have for that when you're trying to build a business, when you need to be focused on sales and providing the service you said you're going to provide to whoever it is you sold it to, or the product or whatever. You don't need to be taking a bookkeeping class on the side, trying to figure out how to do it, messing it up really bad, filing your tax return. The worst tax return I've ever seen is somebody that filed negative gross receipts on a schedule. And I'm sure most of you are like, I would never do that. Okay, well, you would never do that, but there might be a lot of other things where you're really cheating yourself of time and money in the long run. So be honest with yourself about what you really are going to be good at. Not just what you want to do, what you can do, what you're going to be good at. Because you need to pay someone who's actually good at it, likes it, and just loves to make sure it all reconciles and looks wonderful, because
Right.
that's the level of effort that really is involved in making sure that you really get all the deductions you should get, that that someone's keeping you honest, and reminding you of things like, I know you don't think you are, but like your wife has this credit card and it's a business credit card, and I keep seeing stuff on there. I really think that's business stuff and that's commingling. Somebody that's going to talk to you and help you remind you. Because, for instance, that's a true life story. I have a client that's the thing. Like, wife kept using it somewhere else. Well, he doesn't know that because he's not really a bookkeeper. He's not keeping up with it.
Right.
And so he ends up with, commingling.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't. And I don't know where else, but Iberia Bank, I still bank there actually because I have a free business account, and I haven't gotten to the level because our payments are not little bitty payments all the time, and it's transaction based. So my clients are usually big chunks.
Mm-hmm.
So I still have Iberia Bank because it's free, and because the transactions, I haven't reached a level where it costs me any money to have a business banking account, and so there's no excuse. Get a separate
Right.
bank account, keep it separate. Anyway.
And I bank at Ameris Bank, which was formerly Fidelity Bank, and they're the same way. And my kids have accounts there because it's unlimited free accounts, even though my kids might run their accounts, their teenagers, down to $1. I don't get penalized.
That's fine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So something like that, And when I first started out, here I am in corporate, and I know corporate things, and I was been doing this on the side for a while, so I've been learning a lot about not smaller businesses, but even still, I didn't realize that. At first I was like, "Damn, well, I'm paying Chase Bank to have this," or what actually originally it was Bank of America, then I switched to Chase. I'm paying these fees and I don't have enough money coming through the door. This is ridiculous.
Yes.
Like and then I paid a transfer and I paid blah, 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 blah. And so I understand how easy it is for a new business owner to be like, I'm just going to do it out of my bank account. But I'm telling you, you might as well be a sole proprietor and just let every person that ever wanted to sue you know where you live, so they know which house to put a lien on, and whatever. You really need to separate it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your advice. I know that you have a heart for helping people in general. So thank you for all the ways that you give. And definitely to everybody watching, keep Adon in mind if you meet someone who has any kind of issue with the IRS. She will shoot them straight and say, yes, you need me, or no, you don't, and here's why. And I highly recommend that you can refer people, introduce people to her with confidence. But in the meantime, go follow her on social media so that you can get some of that good information that she's putting out there.
We're going to try to put out more tax, just regular tax as tax season goes on. So hopefully there'll be some good tax goodies for you out there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you, everybody, next week for Work Together Wednesday.